this evening. Tonight is our joint meeting with our state delegation, our D20 delegation. We have Delegate Laura Charkoudian, Delegate David Moon, and we will be joined momentarily by Delegate Wilkins and our state senator, Will Smith. So thank you for coming this evening and joining us. We started this tradition, I think, maybe 5-6 years ago now, I can't remember, but it is an opportunity for members of the Takoma Park community to come, and we'll turn it over to public comment in a moment, to hear about the city's legislative priorities and hear directly from the delegation. In pre-COVID times when we were in person, this was a nice way to be able to get together and talk to the delegation before they headed off to Annapolis. And they are headed to Annapolis even sooner this year than most years. And hopefully they will fill us in on the special session next week. But to get us rolling tonight, I'm going to start with public comments this evening from D20 residents and organizations. And the first one we have is Lori McGilvray. Is she with? There's Lori. I'll turn it over to you. Let's see, Lori. Do we need to? I'm asking the city clerk if we need to unmute. There you go, Lori.
Yeah, there I go. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lori McGilvray. I live in Ward 2, and I'm representing the Takoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee and the Climate Justice Wing of the Maryland Legislative Coalition. And I just want to express our deep gratitude for your outstanding leadership in the Maryland General Assembly. We're just really so fortunate to have you in Annapolis. I'm here tonight to strongly support several environmental bills. First, we support passage of the Maryland Environmental Human Rights Act. Essentially, the proposed constitutional amendment will protect each person's right to a healthful and stable environment by requiring the state to preserve these rights for current and future generations. By embedding it in the Maryland Constitution, these environmental rights will be on par with others like freedom of speech. It's a powerful tool for ordinary people to hold the state accountable and to protect Maryland's natural resources and human health. Now is the time to pass it because 2022 is an election year. And if it passes, it could go on the November ballot, just as New York did with a similar bill in the spring, with voters approving it last month. New York joins Pennsylvania and Montana with such rights in their constitutions, and Maryland should too. Second, we want strong, equitable climate change legislation, which is likely to be a comprehensive bill in the Senate and several bills in the House. The elements we want to see are electrifying and improving energy efficiency of buildings, including an all-electric new construction code, building energy performance standards for existing large commercial and multifamily residential buildings, and net zero construction for schools, both K-12 and public universities. Increasing the greenhouse gas reduction goal from 40% to 60% by 2030, accurately accounting for methane emissions, and ensuring a focus on environmental justice and low-income communities. Finally, I want to highlight our support for Delegate Charkoudian's low-income energy efficiency bill. Low-income Marylanders spend considerably more of their income on energy costs than other Marylanders, and yet they benefit the least from energy efficiency programs. The legislation will address this legacy and equity by requiring more robust low-income energy efficiency goals and spending through the Empower program. The legislation also creates a task force that directs state agencies to devise a plan to improve the energy efficiency of all income-eligible homes in Maryland, including leveraging available funding streams. We urge your support for these bills. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I think we have Angela and Michelle. Or are we going to Mr. Whitney?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, Angela, go ahead. Yes, we can hear you. Yep, there you are.
Oh, sorry, I've never done Zoom before.
Well, welcome.
Okay, there it is. Now I can see it. Okay. I had to cut this down a lot to get it under 3 minutes. I'm sorry. I am in a nightmare right now that began with my because my landlord making racist comments outside of my building to my neighbor. He said he was tired of you blacks. Shocked me because I've never heard him say anything like that. But the way he would bang on my door and let himself into my home unannounced, clearly there was already no respect. Not too long after that, there was a notice taped to my door to pay or quit, stating that I owed $540 in late fees and another $1,335 past due rent. Again, shocked because I had no idea what they were talking about. There was another note saying that just said, just get out because of the lease violations. This was beginning of August, so I just paid rent before they posted this on my front door. Fast forward, because I know I only got 3 minutes. What I initially wanted to know is where they were getting these numbers from. I still don't know. Where are they getting this information? I still don't know. The city got involved, and it turns out Takoma Park is rent controlled. I did not know that. Everyone in my building has been overcharged, some of us for years. For me, it was 3 years, and they owed us a refund. Now they are really mad. So now they have crunched some new numbers and decided that they made a mistake, and I actually owe over $7,000. The math is wrong. Some of the numbers are completely made up. The housing office sent me these numbers twice now without any instruction except to review and contact if I have any questions. Lots of questions. This is to draw this out as long as possible after putting a 60-day notice on my door. So now I'm trying not to be homeless in the middle of winter. I've been paying rent this whole time, by the way. I'm really disappointed in the reaction from the city. This is my life. I don't think anyone is taking this seriously or cares. I paid rent throughout the lockdown. This has been going on for 4 months. We've got nowhere except now my landlord has been cited by the city for 28 building violations. So it's actually worse now. I want to know where are the checks and balances? Why are landlords allowed to do this? Why can they make racist comments and then put anyone out with the audacity to fight back? Why are they allowed to make up numbers and fees without being checked? It doesn't feel like anyone cares about what happens to the tenants in Takoma Park. And I think that we should be able to check rental history for landlords the same way they check ours. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Michelle. And I promise you that we will, I believe you live in Ms. Dabala's, Councilwoman Dabala's ward, that we will follow up with the staff actually right after this meeting and look into your case right away.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That you've been going through this at this time.
Do we? Yeah. Do we have a contact?
We have.
We do. Okay.
Signed up for public comments.
Okay. We'll double back with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming this evening.
Thanks a lot.
Next, we have Mr. Stephen Whitney.
Good evening. Thank you for taking my comment. Tonight's session seems like a fitting place to read something primarily authored by Larry Silverman. Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Larry, for many years until his death in October, had been such a special presence in Takoma Park. Larry was the co-founder with members of his family of Estinade Beads, a destination shop in town where most of us took our children to learn how to make wonderful necklaces. But Larry was also one of the city's most informed and eloquent environmental activists. He was an environmental lawyer by trade and a mentor to many. And to all who knew him, he was a kind, gentle, and thoughtful soul. This past summer, Larry joined the Climate Action Coffee subgroup, which today is known as Takoma Stormwater Solutions. And he essentially authored the subgroup's statement of purpose. On behalf of the members of TSS and Larry, I'm going to read this statement in order to encourage the city to work diligently and with a sense of urgency with the state and our county and our local experts on stormwater issues in the coming year. This is the statement that Larry wrote, essentially. Takoma Stormwater Solutions promotes stormwater management practices that will help our community cope with a rapidly changing climate. It's more than about flooding. Through advocacy, education, and example, we aim to reduce or mitigate the risks to health, property, and the natural environment from flooding and stream pollution. We seek to advocate for diverse viewpoints, communities, and solutions. We believe that appropriate and equitable stormwater management is an integral element of a sustainable future. There's a lot to unpack in that statement, and I'll spare you this evening, but we'll be back throughout the year. I'd like to just wrap up by saying that we in TSS feel incredibly lucky that Larry shared his last Monday evenings with us. We feel tremendous gratitude for the ways he shaped our collective vision, and we feel an obligation to carry on this work in his name, in his spirit, and with all the positive vision and energy that he bequeathed to our group. Rest in peace, good colleague. May the healing waters carry you to a place of harmony and balance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Whitney. Next, I think we have Mr. Richard December.
Yes, thank you. This is really an interesting process. Thank you for having this, and thanks to both the state people and the city people for the work you do. And thanks for this opportunity. So I'm going to do this a little bit, not in the natural order, and I'm going to tell the state, this is really a state thing, not a city thing, what measure I'm suggesting, then the problem that prompts it, and why I think it's an appropriate measure for dealing with the problem. But I'm not hung up on the measure. I'm mainly hung up on the dealing with the problem, if possible. So it's fundamentally an environmental issue. I'll start with the measure, which is I'm proposing to the state legislative people that the biannual vehicle emissions inspection also get a new component to it, which is a noise inspection. Which the reason for this is you probably already, as soon as I said that, you'll probably already know what the reason is. There's been in the last couple of years a huge increase in the number of vehicles driving around that have been intentionally modified to be as noisy as they can possibly be. Whether it's connected to the pandemic, I don't know. I do know that it's not only a Maryland problem. I went to a wedding in California in Sonoma County a few months ago, and I saw the same thing. So I don't think I need to say too much about it, except to say that it's really, it's very unpleasant. And if you spend any time outside or in the spring or fall when you have the windows open, you're sort of in the grandstand for the Indianapolis 500. And I just don't think we need that. And I don't have to say too much about that. I think it's kind of self-evident, and most of you know what I'm talking about. So the reason I'm suggesting that the problem be dealt with by way of expanding the emissions inspection to be a sort of broader environmental inspection to include noise is because it's totally objective. Well, let me put it another way of dealing with which I'm not recommending would be to have police make stops. But there are so many issues with that, which I don't have to talk about. You all know what the issues are with that. Many, many issues. If you add it as part of the inspection, it's totally objective. It's a technician and a piece of equipment. There's no police involvement, but ultimately there is a very powerful enforcement. I assume the state has ways of making sure that people pass their emissions or their registrations don't get renewed or something like that. Whatever that enforcement mechanism is, could be applicable to this. These may be famous last words. It's a little hard for me to imagine that this would be controversial. So that's really all I have to say about it. I mean, it's been bugging me now. Peter has gotten an earful from me about this. It's not Peter doesn't have any control over it. So that's it. I had some correspondence with Janelle about it. Maybe 6 months ago or a year ago. She said she would ask her staff to look into
Mr.
it.
Sember, the 3 minutes are up. Sorry.
Good enough. I've said what I need to say. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you very much for raising this issue. I'll ask the city clerk. I don't believe the other 2 people who had signed up for public comment are with us at this moment. Is that correct?
That is correct. They have not joined the meeting. I'm sorry.
All right. So that concludes the public comments for this evening. Now we'll move into the presentation of the legislative priorities from the City Council. And I'll kick us off. One again, saying welcome and thank you to our D20 delegation for all your work on behalf of the residents of Takoma Park. I know that sometimes people can take for granted all the work that you do, but I can tell you now, working with mayors and others around Montgomery County and in Prince George's County, you all are known as being some of the best representatives of your residents and community, and we very much appreciate it. In particular, as we kick off this evening, we want to extend a congratulations to Delegate Moon for his appointment as the Vice Chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and as well as Delegate Charkoudian for her appointment as Chair of the Unemployment Insurance Subcommittee. So just want to congratulate both of you on that. And we're going to run through some of our priorities and talk about some of the things that are happening here in the city, particularly in our COVID-19 response. So I'm going to turn it over now to Councilmember Kovar to kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to our delegation for being here with us. I'll just follow on briefly with what the mayor said. We're very fortunate to have a group who I think do such a great job of representing us, and who I think from a policy and political point of view, we're so in sync with. So we probably don't get as many chances as we ought to just say thanks for that on an ongoing basis. So we really do appreciate it. I'll try to go quickly through I'm assigned the next 2 pages. So first, and this is a big priority, of course, and it affects so many aspects of all the work that we do, mitigating the impacts of the pandemic on residents, businesses, and the city as a whole. So the first one is Delegate Wilkins's Stable Homes Act, which addresses the question of just cause eviction. It's a big problem, even not in the pandemic, but obviously it's exacerbated by the pandemic. And in fact, the resident who spoke in the public comment period a short time ago, I think in some ways illustrates what the issue is in terms of how difficult it can be for tenants, given the current state of the law here in Maryland, that often for reasons that might not even be clear or that are directly retaliatory can face evictions. And so this bill, and I don't need to tell those of you who are in our state delegation what it would do, but by limiting to certain specific areas and saying what they are for the kinds of things for which people can be evicted, I think is a huge step forward. It's kind of shocking that it doesn't even exist. And so we would put that on the list of one of the things that we hope can go further this year than it did last year. And again, appreciate in particular Delegate Wilkins's work on that, although of course the county delegation supported it. The second one is increasing the ability of renters to have access to legal counsel, and then also emergency rental assistance that supports tenants, landlords, and property owners. So there was a big effort, of course, in the last session to try to increase the ability of renters to have access to legal counsel. It got heavily watered down to the point where I don't think it really had much value at all. And I think this is one of those examples where when tenants do have representation, sometimes they're able to afford it on their own, sometimes working with local nonprofits or other pro bono situations, it really makes a huge difference. But sending them in effect on their own is very difficult. And so we'd really like to see that. And more generally, and this is specifically with regard to responding to COVID, we've set aside funds. There is ARPA money as well, but all of these funds overlap in different ways. And even though all levels of the government are trying to address that, there's just so much more that can be done. And so we'd like to see steps taken there. And then the third item on this page is providing assistance for residents, businesses, and local government. Now, this is separate from the rental assistance category, and we're just looking for help. Again, the city has done a lot, and we do have the ability to use ARPA funds, but there are all kinds of issues, including, for example, when we look at the impact of transit with the purple line and just the impact on small businesses generally, that if there's assistance that can be provided that is tied specifically to the pandemic, we would appreciate that. And then going on to the next page, this is more generally on affordable housing and energy efficient housing. And this topic, energy efficient housing, was also mentioned by one of our residents. We didn't know that was going to happen, but that illustrates the point. But these are areas not specific to COVID. And so just very quickly, I'll go through the bullet points. The first one, we do have a strategic plan on housing and economic development. And what we've seen, we have some small projects that we're doing in collaboration, for example, with Habitat for Humanity and other nonprofits to try to keep units affordable here in the city. But it's a lot of work for staff and the lawyers and the organizations. It takes months to put those deals together. And so I think, for me personally anyway, and I think my colleagues agree with this, we'd like to see some ability to address that kind of affordability challenge on a broader scale. The next one, requiring district courts collect and share data related to evictions. This is crucial. It's a set of data that just isn't collected in a comprehensive enough way. We find challenges in COVID and in general, we've seen it more in COVID, just understanding who's really facing eviction, where that occurs, et cetera. And with Takoma Park being the location for many of the affordable housing units here in the county, we think it's very important to improve that information. The next one, passing legislation shielding court records related to failure to pay rent judgments. An example, there are many in our society of where lower income people end up getting punished a second time over in the legal system. And really in many cases, and when you talk about just cause evictions and so on, in many cases, renters or tenants haven't done anything wrong themselves, and yet they could still be records there that are going to harm them in the future and shouldn't be kept as public or easily accessible kinds of information. So shielding those records, I think, is really important. And then lastly, and this was mentioned previously by one of our public comment speakers, trying to address energy efficiency in the context of low and middle income housing. And of course, Delegate Charkoudian's bill, I think she did it jointly with Senator Feldman. It really is one of those things that hits several key points at the same time. Number one, it can make housing more affordable for lower income people who are paying a very high percentage of their limited income in energy costs, but it also meshes with the climate strategies that the city and the county and the state all have, and it may also create jobs. And so we would like to see not only Delegate Charkoudian's bill passed, but other efforts along those lines as well. And when you're talking about climate change, one's thoughts turn naturally to Councilmember DeBala, who is next in line.
And so following up on the intersection of climate work and housing work, which is, I think, for all seven of us, really, not to mention our residents, really important. If we spent tonight thanking you for every single thing that you did for Takoma Park last year, we'd be here all night. So I'm just adding on my thank yous generally, particularly in the housing and climate arena. I think there was a great deal of progress on the intersection last year, and I hope we can move that further this year. So no surprise that Takoma Park again has as a priority mitigating the impacts of climate change. So that would be, as was so eloquently described earlier by two speakers, passing legislation with aggressive climate targets, facilitating greater use of zero emission vehicles, public transit, and other decarbonizing strategies. So building, housing, buildings, transportation, environmental health is a human right. And the last bullet is pictures, not words. but it is stormwater mitigation, adaptation issues that we feel are really prominent in Takoma Park. All you have to do is be at the bottom of Prince George's Avenue and you know when it's raining. Last year we had that stormwater bill. That was great. And then what can we follow up to do to implement that, to bring it down to the local level and to work together on solutions, both in the public and private sector. So that's the climate priority. On to the next slide. And I believe this is Councilmember Searcy.
Yep. Siemens. The other S.
No?
I think it's
One of the yes council members. I don't have all my screens up tonight.
I think it's Councilmember Siemens, so thank you. And first, I'd like to thank each of you for your dedication and hard work for the community. I'd especially like to call out my neighbor, Delegate Moon, and thank you for your work. The reimagining public safety has been such a key issue in Takoma Park. I want to thank Senator Smith and Delegate Moon for your work and reforms that hold police accountable, including here in the municipalities. The second, I'd like to thank you for helping build trust between the police and the immigrant community by overriding the veto on the Dignity Not Detention Act sponsored by Senator Smith. And then lastly, thank you for the increase in support for a behavioral health crisis system that increases the opportunity for intervention by health professionals and minimizes the presence of police. As you know, this is an area where the state must take leadership and ensure that it is a comprehensive continuum of mental health care for our residents. It's one of the top issues the police deal with day in and day out, and something that we have not had sufficient resources to address. I thank you, and now I think we turn it over to Ms. Councilmember Searcy.
Nope, not yet. Caustic.
Yeah, boy, you're getting a lot of.
I'll take over.
Do I get to shout out to my neighbor, Laura, Delegate Charcudian? Sorry for leaving you out there before.
Well, I will shout out to all of you and just want to keep on my appreciation that everyone else has shared for all of your work and how lucky we are to have you all as our representatives. I'm just going to run through some additional priorities here. First of all, we, as I know you do as well, want to encourage timely Purple Line construction and mitigation efforts. A thank you to Delegate Wilkins for the Purple Line Small Business Funds. We also want to continue efforts to meet our Vision Zero goals for pedestrian safety. And there we want to call it Delegate Moon's Speed and School Bus Monitoring Systems Bill. This is an area where I feel like we all, and I know I have been, and I believe many of my colleagues have as well, hearing from people more and more about transportation safety and pedestrian safety in the community and concerns about speeds and cars zooming through and driving unsafely. So this is definitely an area of priority for us as well. We want to ensure that any legislation of cannabis utilizes revenue to invest in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the quote unquote war on drugs. And we want to support efforts to consolidate election ballots. As you know, that's been an ongoing issue for the city and something we'd like to move forward on if possible. I think we can move to the next slide then. And then I will just kind of kick us off with some information about COVID-19 data and relief efforts here in the city. the economic disparities, as you know, that existed in terms of employment, educational attainment, and wealth building prior to the pandemic for Takoma Park's Black and Brown populations have been aggravated by the pandemic. And we all know we've seen a lot of crisis in the community over the past couple of years that has increased due to the pandemic. Takoma Park's small businesses, particularly our immigrant and minority-owned businesses, have been particularly hard hit during the public health crisis. We have had support from the city as well as from the OTBA in Old Town and the CDA in the Crossroads area, helping. And we've seen, this was a really great celebration. Just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated 20 businesses that have opened in the past year and a half, which is really excellent. And they obviously will continue to need support and encouragement from all of us as we move forward. So now I think for the next slide, I am turning it over to Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Councilmember Kostick. I'm going to talk about what the city staff has been doing on the grassroots level. Expansion of emergency financial assistance during the pandemic, including eviction prevention, prescription assistance, food support, utility disconnection prevention, and assistance with personal protective equipment. This was extremely important when at the beginning of the pandemic, when we didn't really know what we were up against with COVID-19. And in many situations, we need to maintain some of these prevention protocols. Rental assistance program has been critical. Many residents have either fallen behind on their rent for many months or even a couple months. And we have cobbled together with city support before President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan Act in March to get people caught up. It's also been helpful in making sure that people can eat in our community. This has been done with a small group of people. They've been doing yeoman's work. Next slide, please. So if you look at some of the amounts of money that we have actually allocated to help us either in loss revenue reimbursement or food insecurity, emergency rental assistance, all for FY22, we're talking $2.2 million. We expect between FY23 and FY27, just if you look at, we're only looking at 3 line items here for a total of $945,000. Through the ARPA Act, the city of Takoma Park was allocated a total of $17.4 million. And right now we have $14.2 million still available. But, you know, as the pandemic continues to rear its ugly head, I expect that we will have to draw down on that number in a more aggressive manner coming up. So I'll give it to my colleague.
Great. So as Councilmember Smith left off, we have about $14.2 million left under our ARPA allocations, but we've done a lot so far in providing services to residents in need. This is just an example of the work that we've done thus far in terms of emergency rental assistance that has been provided so far. We've spent over $110,000 so far in delivering services. And we've served currently about 27 6 unique households throughout the city, with an average award of $2,700. And I think this is important to keep in mind, is that we've just started, and we're only talking about $110,000 right now, but just keep in mind that we will have additional resources under ARPA to distribute. And I think the big thing that'll be important as we're trying to meet the current needs and the future needs as a result of the pandemic, it's coordination in terms of the allocations of state resources as well as county resources is going to be critical to ensure that all of our residents receive what they need. Next slide, please. And just kind of diving a little deeper, in terms of who we're serving and who we're partnering with. In terms of the assistance that has gone out so far, about 46% of those households have children. So just keep in mind that when we're talking about households, we're not talking about individuals. In many cases, you're talking about entire families. And about 40% of those households have seniors in them. So again, we're trying to reach the most vulnerable in our community, which is important. And I think another thing that is really important that's shown here is the referrals that we receive and who we are partnering with. We're partnering with the county, we're partnering with our own internal city offices, as well as external nonprofit partners such as MUST. Next slide, please. And so this slide just shows you again and highlights the economic vitality that's in our community despite the challenges associated with the pandemic. These are pictures of all of the businesses that we've recently had an opportunity to have ribbon cuttings for in celebration of them opening during the pandemic. So all of the things that we've talked about today, from economic development and Purple Line and traffic and stormwater and assistance, is really, at the end of the day, about the people. It's about the people and the business owners, many of which live in this community. It's about the residents we've heard from today, and making sure that they're able to live comfortably in their homes in the city. And it's about making sure that we're able to continue to partner with you all to make sure that not only you are doing things in Annapolis to support us, but there are ways in which we might be able to support you in Annapolis to make sure that we're continuing to meet the needs of D20 residents. So I think that is the last slide. So again, thank you. And I'll turn things back over to Mayor Stewart.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for those presentations. And now I want to turn it over to the delegation to ask us any questions about those priorities, the work that we're doing in the city, but also to provide you all the opportunity to highlight the work that you'll be doing when you head to Annapolis, and to specifically highlight areas where we can be of assistance here in the community to you all as you do your work. I don't know if I'm kicking it over to Delegate Moon or Delegate Charkoudian first.
Sure. Thanks everyone for keeping this tradition going in pandemic Zoom times. And I'm always glad to hear a ground level view from folks in Takoma Park. I'm Delegate David Moon. I live on Ritchie Ave, represented capably by Councilmember Terry Siemens in Ward 4. And I'll just say, we're going into special session next week, actually, which is about a month and some change early for us. And the stated reason is redistricting, but we have a big basket of veto overrides to take up. So I just want to flag some of those. They deal with some of the issues you were talking about, but we've got to overturn the governor's veto on immigrant rights, and particularly whether police in Maryland can stop you and start questioning you about your immigration status, and whether we're going to allow counties to continue operating for-profit jails to detain our immigrant residents. We also have a bill to get the governor out of the parole process. So folks who've been recommended for release after decades, that's another bill that the governor vetoed that we would like to see overturned. we're having an overdose problem during the pandemic also, and we had a bill to push more of a public health response instead of the old war on drugs mentality. And it basically took a 4-year prison term off of syringe possession in Maryland, which we believe leads people to ditch these syringes in public places. Frankly, I have encountered them myself in problematic places, and they hide them from the police because of the harsh penalties. So it subjects first responders to pinprick risk. So that's another one we're going to try and override. And then we had some collective bargaining and some transit funding and Purple Line relief. But on the sort of, I'll just globally touch on a few of the issues both the city and the residents have raised that at least I'm aware of things that are cooking. And I'll say the issue of renters has been an ongoing debate within the assembly. I'd love to say, oh, it's the Republicans and the governor did this, but no, in fact, members are all over the map on where we ought to go on renter policy, including within Democrats and including within Montgomery County. So Delegate Wilkins has been trying to push just cause eviction so that people can't just be removed from their homes willy-nilly. We've had bills to create a right to a lawyer if you're facing an eviction process, and a funded right to a lawyer if you're facing an eviction process. And the reality is we've been slow in Maryland to distribute relief funds for renters, even as all of these other policies failed to get through, while other states raced it through. So you're right, there's more coordination needed. We haven't gotten a lot of the underlying policies through. And even when it comes to funds we haven't been able to get them to people quickly enough. And I could point to a million reasons for why these things have gone wrong, but it's on us and time is ticking. So happy to dive into that. And I'll just touch on one more and then let Laura, I know she'll want to talk about some of the stormwater and environmental issues that were raised. And that's the issue of the noise, the vehicle modifications. I live next to the Department of Public Works. And so noise pollution is something I'm quite familiar with, especially coming from large or modified vehicles. And so there will be legislation. I believe it'll be Senator Kramer and Delegate Mary Lehman from Prince George's in a 2-county push to require at the time of registering or renewing a registration for your vehicle or your emissions, that the sound modifications be something that could flag your car for non-renewal. And you could see that this is part of a, people are trying to look at ways to get these creative problems solved without having to criminalize people. And you'll see a similar thing, discussion going on with respect to the sort of auto gatherings that happened in Silver Spring and are happening all around the region, where in Montgomery, I know they're trying to contact people's insurance companies to get an insurance ding. Whereas I know in Fairfax, they were trying to charge people with crime. So different strokes for different folks at the moment, but hopefully some of this stuff is creating progress. So thank you again for all of your work, and I look forward to a session in a year back at it with all of you. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks to the council for all of your extraordinary work in really, really hard times. I really appreciate that, as well as to the staff, and appreciate folks who came on to share their perspectives with us. And for, a lot of people know how to reach us, but if you didn't get a chance to come on in the public comment period, please feel free to reach out to us by email or phone or any other way, or track us down in the neighborhood. And so I will talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the bills that I have coming up related to some of the issues that you brought up. I'll start with the environmental issues, since that was must be a theme for us if we want to have a future on this planet. So a couple sort of big picture bills. It's been mentioned that I have the bill that's related to the low income energy efficiency. So we'll be bringing that one back. And in addition to sort of streamlining, creating one-stop shop and streamlining all the various funding sources, it addresses both energy efficiency as well as indoor air quality and health and safety issues, because a lot of those investments are similar. So that is coming back, and hopefully third time is a charm. We have worked very hard on that bill. Also related to climate change, two other bills related to the distribution grid. One is just a broader distribution grid planning bill that requires the utilities to coordinate and make their investments in the utility grid consistent with state policies around decarbonization and equity, resilience, and labor standards. And so it seems kind of technical and wonky, but the bottom line is that the distribution grid itself really can be invested in a way that can be a fight against climate change, or it can continue to sort of limp along in a way that that gets in the way of our ability to bring more clean energy onto the grid. So it's a pretty important piece of the puzzle. And then related to that, I have a separate bill that's to create microgrids in low-income communities. And so if you imagine, if you think about New Orleans and Texas and periods of long-term grid outages, and the most vulnerable communities have the most suffering and the most death. And so creating a clean microgrid in a low-income community ensures resilience, and it allows a sort of a shelter to be able to carry on when the rest of the grid is out. So those are sort of three big energy bills. Staying on the environment and related to transit and transportation and pedestrian safety, I do have a big SHA pedestrian safety bill. So related to Vision Zero and requiring the State Highway Administration to both do an analysis and make it public, because the State Highway tends to do analyses and keep them private. So an analysis of the high fatality and serious injury corridors in the state, develop a plan and implement that plan. But in the meantime, because that will take some time, it really forces the State Highway Administration to have minimum amounts of spending that's roughly 3 to 4 times what they're currently spending on things like sidewalks and hawk signals and crosswalks and bike lanes. And those kinds of things. So what we have happening right now, and many of you have joined us on safety walks with the State Highway Administration. So we have this SHA comes out and everyone looks at an intersection or a corridor and agrees that things need to change, but then it gets in a queue and the money's not there. And then, 4 years later, maybe there's a partial investment. And we tragically had that situation right at Carolyn University, where many of you were there with us. We looked at that intersection. We identified things that need to change. It got on a list somewhere at SHA, and someone was killed before SHA has gotten around, and they still haven't gotten around to doing those upgrades. So the bill requires significantly more spending so that these intersections and corridors that they identify can be fixed sooner, basically. So there's that one. Also sort of in the environmental bucket, folks may recall that last year I had a significant compost bill, zero as a organics waste ban. This year, the compost bill is for a grant program for schools to establish compost programs, especially student-led compost programs. We have a lot of extraordinary students working at this, and this would support those efforts and really hopefully grow them so they can bring them into eventually as part of the standard processes in school systems. So moving to economic justice, I have a wage theft and retaliation bill. So while that I know that is generally justice is important to labor standards and so on are important to folks in the city. So I just wanted to mention that one. And then also sort of under the food security issue, which many of you have raised, as well as the environmental issue, I do have a package of farm to food security, which increases our investment in a number of areas that bring food to people who are struggling with food insecurity from Maryland farms. So there's a couple different ways that that bill does that. And hopefully continues to support Maryland Market Money also, which is the doubling of federal nutrition benefits at farmers markets. A couple other things that you mentioned. I did have the bill last year related to funding of mobile crisis units. So that bill passed last year, but the portion of it that did not pass, that was amended out, was the portion that was related to limiting police involvement in with designing mobile crisis units specifically to limit police involvement with somebody who's struggling with a mental health crisis. And also the section that was related to 911 and establishing 911's ability to deploy essentially a mobile crisis unit or to triage, to be able to send a mobile crisis unit. So basically we have a bill that's bringing those two pieces back, limiting of the police involvement and then related to the 911 part of it. I think those are the main ones that I have that tie to some of the issues that you talked about. I do want to mention one other one that I think is significant as it relates to sort of economic security and the some of the stuff we found during the pandemic and again, what I believe to be Takoma Park values. Right now, our energy assistance programs are limited to folks who have documentation in the US. And so our undocumented neighbors don't have access, even though they pay into the systems that create the energy assistance, utility assistance funds. They don't have access to those funds. And it has to do with the fact that the state, even though, so some of the funds are federal funds and some of the funds are state funds, and we can't change the federal rules, but we can change the state rules. And so the bill that I have essentially takes the state portion of the funds that go towards energy assistance, utility assistance, and adjusts the way that the Department of Human Services distributes them so that everybody in our community who might be struggling to pay a utility bill has the ability to access those funds. And so I wanted to mention that one as well. And I can stop there. If you have questions later, I can talk more about any of those.
Thank you so much. And I see we have Delegate Wilkins with us. Thank you, Delegate Wilkins, for joining us tonight. Are there some bills or work that you are jumping into in Annapolis that you'd like to highlight for us this evening? We did talk about stable homes and a number of other things, and all the great work in bringing the assistance to our businesses along the Purple Line. And we thank you so much for all of that work. I'll turn it over to you now.
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to join everyone. I am joining you a little bit late. I'm coming to you from the National Black Caucus of State Legislators Conference. We just finished up for the day. So I did miss a bit of the presentation and comments, but I'm looking forward to catching up on it. Great to be with the District 20 team and our wonderful City of Takoma Park colleagues. Hello, Administrator Jamal Fox. It's wonderful to join you and be with you, and welcome again. So again, I am Janelle Wilkins, representing District 20 along with David and Lorig, and just like to start out by saying what a pleasure it has been serving with this amazing team for the last 3 years. I'm really looking at this next legislative session really as finishing some of the business that we've started throughout the term. This is, of course, the very last session of our 4-year term. And so the bills that I'm going to talk with you about today that I'm prioritizing and leading on are really issues that we've been working on for a number of years now, and really looking to bring them across the finish line in the 2022 session. So to give you a little bit more context, one of them, if you've been to these meetings, our annual convening together with the City of Takoma Park, you know that justice and policing issues, certainly one that I'm very passionate about and have been working to lead on. And when it comes to the issue of justice and policing, one of the bills that I've introduced and I'm working with Senator Smith on has to do with qualified immunity for police officers. We know that we've done a lot of work work around policing, to ensure that our communities are safe, to ensure that residents are able to get fair treatment. And one thing that we did leave on the table, though, is the issue of immunity for officers. When egregious actions take place, officers being held directly accountable without being able to say, hey, I'm immune, which really causes justice to be obstructed and victims not being able to obtain the compensation and the justice that they deserve. So folks might not know that we have immunity in our state laws in Maryland. It's not just the federal level when you talk about qualified immunity, but we have immunity for officers at the state level. So I do have a state qualified immunity bill that would remove that immunity for situations, egregious actions that take place, and ensure that officers are able to be held directly liable. Along the same lines, one of the issues that I've been working on deals with our pensions. I think that the best example for everyone is if you think about Derek Chauvin, the George Floyd case. Derek Chauvin is a convicted murderer who will receive his full pension. And in the state of Maryland, an officer can be convicted of perjury, of fraud, convicted of egregious criminal actions, and still able to obtain and keep their pension. And so what my pension bill will do that I'm working on is that it will ensure a forfeiture of those state funds when it comes to an officer being convicted of a crime. So those are the two major justice and policing bills that I'm working on, and really looking forward to being able to take those over to the finish line in the upcoming session. I also want to mention voting rights. I'm the chair of election law in the House, and we're able to get a lot done this 2021 session. Going into the election year next year, we probably won't make significant changes around our elections because we want to make sure we don't overwhelm our local boards of elections and that implementation administration. But one of the bills that I am introducing deals with our work around jail voting. Individuals who are either awaiting trial, who are in jail, or if they're convicted of a misdemeanor, are eligible to vote in the state of Maryland. And we were able to pass legislation I sponsored this year to ensure that right for them. But we're going back to make sure that they have access to drop boxes. We, as a country and in our Constitution, we believe in equal access to the ballot. We want to ensure that our incarcerated individuals who are eligible to vote have all of the due rights that they should have. So that includes drop boxes. That includes being able to make a toll-free call to the Board of Elections as a right if you have questions or if you didn't receive your ballot. Making sure that they have that access is something that is critically important. We talk about the right to vote for everyone. I do want to make a quick plug for everyone around the voting rights issue that we passed legislation this year where you can opt in to vote by mail permanently. You can request an absentee ballot today for the 2022 election. You can check a box to let the State Board of Elections and local Board of Elections know that you would like your ballot mailed to you in every single election. So we now have permanent absentee ballot voting available. So I want to make sure that everyone is aware of that as well. Very quickly, the last two buckets of issues are renters' rights. I know this has been discussed a little bit. I do plan to bring back my emergency eviction legislation, despite where we are in the pandemic. We're in sort of a precarious position right now as we're looking at Omicron and that variant. However, wherever we are when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, the housing crisis does continue. Even if we're able to solve COVID-19 right now in this moment, people would still have rent debt. People would still have all types of challenges when it comes to being able to maintain their homes. And so my emergency eviction legislation ensures that both in the current pandemic, but also in future pandemics, that individuals have the ability to defend themselves from eviction by sharing that they have a COVID-19 impact when it comes to their inability to be able to cover their rent. The Montgomery County Stable Homes Act as well is another bill that I've prioritized. And as you all know from me talking about this bill all of the time, every year that I'm here, that bill ensures that a landlord has to provide a reason if the landlord decides not to continue to lease to a tenant. That bill, we are taking it statewide next year. As you may recall, that has been a local bill in the past that just applies to Montgomery County, but there's been so much energy around this legislation. Baltimore City has passed something similar. All of the gubernatorial candidates on the Democratic side have voiced support for just cause eviction. We want to ensure that jurisdictions across the state are enabled to be able to implement just cause eviction and the Stable Homes Act if they would like to. So it is going to be a statewide bill this upcoming session. I do have some education bills, but just in the interest of time, those are sort of the big buckets that I'm focusing in on and working to make sure that we're able to really accomplish and finish out the work this legislative session. And just want to thank Will and David and Lori for all of the teamwork over the last couple of years.
Great, terrific. Thank you so much for those updates. I want to turn to my council colleagues or city staff and see if people had any questions or if the delegation had any questions for us on what our priorities are. Anyone like to kick off? Councilwoman Costick?
I will kick off. I don't have a lot to say besides, wow, really exciting rundown of everything that you all are planning, and really appreciate it all. I just had a couple of comments related to a few things that you all brought up with regard to the transportation and public safety and Vision Zero bill. Delegate Charkoudian, I just wanted to note that the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board has also been working with the DOTs in Maryland, Virginia, and the district to try to kind of coordinate throughout the region on encouraging more improvements to safety and really raising alarms about the number of fatalities and serious injuries that we've had. And so we've had kind of a rotating update from each of the DOTs over the past year or so, coming to the Transportation Planning Board to report out on the work that they're doing. And I just wanted to note that because there might be some opportunities to just sort of collaborate there or think through what the Transportation Planning Board has been doing and what the DOTs are doing and how we're coordinating with them. And the TPB also passed a resolution that outlined a couple of pages worth of recommendations to DOTs in terms of specific improvements to safety that would benefit pedestrians. So I'm happy to share those materials with you. You may have seen them already, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating what you already know, but just wanted to raise that. And then I just had a question because it piqued my interest when you mentioned it, Delegate Wilkins, with regard to the gubernatorial candidates supporting the just cause election or just cause eviction law. And I was just curious if that's both Democrats and Republicans and others that you've talked with.
Thank you, Casey. That's a great question. So this came up at the Renters Alliance. Basically, there was a forum a couple of months ago where the Renters Alliance convened all of the candidates. Only the Democratic candidates decided to attend. So the Democratic candidates that were in attendance, which was the majority and all of the leading candidates, they all expressed several times their support for just cause eviction. So the jury's still out. I could make some assumptions, but the jury's still out for the Republican candidates, but the Democratic ones did also express strong support for just cause eviction.
Great, thank you. And that's all I have for right now, but just again, thank you all for your work.
Thanks. I actually had a question for Delegate Moon. I know you had, we're glad that your speed limit bill went through last year. And we did note the speed and school bus monitoring systems bill, but I'm not sure if residents are as familiar with that bill. So I don't know if you could take a few moments and tell us what would be covered there and how we can be of assistance in the city as you move that forward.
Sure. The team has gotten behind a bill to adjust some of the laws we have previously passed governing Vision Zero, and that's to drive pedestrian and road deaths down to zero, in Montgomery County and statewide, and what the interaction of photo enforcement tools is with this. And so there's a bill that's taking a look at two aspects of this. One is the school bus cameras that have been in use in Montgomery County for the last few years, and the other is a new grant of power to the county and cities to lower speeds down to as low as 15 miles an hour on roads where that's warranted for safety reasons. And so the whole question about whether you allow photo enforcement, there comes up, and I get it. People are very agitated at the idea that we're going to put the limit low on a particular road and then come back later and stick a camera on there. I get that concern. But what I'll say is, as an overall picture, we've been locked in this pro or con battle about speed cameras. And really, I took a look at what was going on in Baltimore and Anne Arundel just this year. Rather than saying yes or no outright to speed cameras, what they started to do was say, all right, you can use these speed cameras, but we're going to dedicate the funds to improving the safety conditions of the road where those tickets are generated. And so that appears to be a new local perspective coming online. So I went back into the Montgomery County law and said, all right, we don't need to ban this outright in cities here. But why don't we say, if you're going to do it, you have to have a plan to direct this money to actually improve the place where these fines are coming from. And the concept is the same with the school bus cameras. Long Branch, downtown Silver Spring, whatever, they're generating thousands and thousands of school bus camera tickets from people on the opposite side of an 8-lane road. And it's enough money. That's $1 million a year in tickets, enough to build a median and actually make that road safer for the kids. So that's really the goal of this legislation.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Searcy?
Great, thank you so much. So I do have a question for Delegate Charkoudian. One thing that you mentioned in your mobile crisis bill that you all tried to work on last year, which related to 911, is the difficulty of making modifications to 911. And I know there's efforts that are happening at a national level around 988 and the suicide hotline, mental health crisis hotline, and kind of getting that up and running. Is that something that you all may be thinking about trying to incorporate in the next iteration to try to address how there may be a non-911 approach to connect mobile crisis units to those in need?
Yeah, absolutely. So 988 is a really important piece of a mental health response, and the way 988 is designed is it's primarily crisis, but it also has the ability over time to be connecting people with community resources even when they're not in crisis. And so really, we need to address crises, and we've got to get healthcare providers, mental health care providers to crises instead of law enforcement to save lives. But obviously the way that we prevent the crises is by fully investing in the, broader community health, mental health services. And so 988 is a part sort of both of those. And there are efforts in place right now to identify funding sources and to figure out how to establish 988 in the state. The primary way that it's funded, and I think the way ultimately it will be funded in this state, is through a surcharge on cell phones. I think that's or phone bills, cell phones, and if anyone has landline left. But I think that so that I think is the direction we're headed. It's not clear that whether we'll get there this year or next year or over time. And I think there's some of the things I've heard. I haven't seen the bills, but some of what I've heard is that it might be piloted related to GBRICS, which is in the Baltimore County region first, and then expand to the rest of the state. So there's a couple different ways that could play out, but I expect in the next few years that we'll be there. In the meantime, and even to some extent in the long term, I think it's still really important to get 911 to be able to dispatch mobile crisis units. And the reason is that I think there's a lot of work that we need to do to get folks to call and to access the range of resources and not just call 911. There's the education piece of it and all of that. There's but to the extent that people will continue to call 911, that for my whole life, anyways, I think generation before mine, like it's been drilled in when there's an emergency, call 911. So even while we are funding and promoting and increasing the use of 988, I think we want to make sure that 911 calls have the ability, even if eventually it's just to divert people to 988, that within 911, there are policies and procedures and triage systems in place that get mental health crises, behavioral health crises to professionals in mental health and behavioral health or peer supports or whatever is needed. So I think, so in my mind, even though that's sort of coming, there's still a need to set up 911 to be able to do this kind of triage. And so that's why I think it's still really important to invest in that.
Great, thank you. And I totally agree. I think that there's that interim solution until you get the 988 stood up, and there's still going to need to be crossover that would happen between the two. Yep. And just interested in terms of kind of how we're thinking through the timing in terms of what bills are coming down the pipe.
Yeah, I mean, keep an eye out. I think at the very least, we'll probably see a study bill of like, how can we fund, like, what will it cost and how can we fund 988? If we don't get the bill that is like, here's the initial funding, which we could get. But if we don't get that through, I think at the very least, we'll get a study bill through. It's clear that that's the direction we're going in. And I think it's just going to be a question of we'll keep pushing to move there as quickly as possible.
Great. Thank you so much.
Doesn't help if I ask my question while I'm mute. I had a follow-up question for Delegate Charkoudian. Building on the success from last session of the community choice energy, could you tell us like where that is now and where it's going, just to kind of update residents on that?
Well, we should have probably kept Lori McGilvery on here because she is, I will say, one of the heroes who is on the and say hero because there's a ton of work going into taking it from statute, which is what we finally passed last year, to getting the regs written. So the way it works is the statute passed enabling this pilot, but then there's a significant amount of regulatory work that needs to be put into place at the Public Service Commission level. And the way that we set that up was with a working group, I think we're calling it task force something, that includes the utilities, the distribution utilities, retail suppliers, as well as environmental advocates and the county and experts in community choice energy and others. And there's still, I think folks know that the distribution utilities fought really hard against it. We eventually got it passed, and they continue to raise concerns and, essentially slow it down at the Public Service Commission level. So it's moving there, and we have some timelines associated with it. But there's still a lot of discussions just about the details and how you implement a lot of these details. The county has hired, or is about to hire, I think there was an RFP out, a consultant to help the county develop how they want to move the community choice aggregator forward. And I think once that person is hired, they'll be able to also interact with the Public Service Commission's process. And that'll, it'll sort of support pushing for regulations that really fit what the goals of the county are. And I would just remind you, like the sort of simplest way to do a community choice aggregator is for the county to aggregate and then put the entire county's load onto one retail supplier or 4 retail suppliers who primarily purchase RECs, clean RECs. I mean, we can control what the renewable energy credits are. who are primarily, doing the 100% clean energy through RECs. And that's not a bad move. It's better than what we have right now. But there's so much more that can be done with a community choice aggregator that can really move the needle on clean energy, on local generation of clean energy, on adding things like more energy efficiency, on adding equity components into it. And so, the Public Service Commission process would be pretty straightforward if we were taking the simplest path possible of just having a retail supplier take the load of the whole county and purchase RECs. But because we've been committed, and we all, including all of you and many Takoma Park residents, fought so hard to pass enabling legislation that really allowed for all of these other things to happen, that really move the needle on clean energy development overall, and specifically local generation of clean energy. It just becomes more complicated. And so that's really why there is now this process going on. So I'm saying it's complicated, and it's a lot of meetings, but we're not behind yet, like we're still on track to the deadlines that we had in the bill. And I will thank Lori and others who are on that working group. And it is a lot of work, and they continue really good advocacy.
Great. Terrific. Well, I'm not seeing any other hands from my colleagues. I don't know if there are any last words from the delegation. I know you all are working hard, and and it's getting late. So I think we could wrap up. I want to thank you all again for joining us this evening. I think it's a great opportunity to get together. And so we look forward to supporting your work in Annapolis. And good luck next week, I guess, in the veto override session and redistricting. So thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.